From colonial rule to networked hegemony, the British Empire and the US global order. Empires have long been the engines of global change. They expand, consolidate, and eventually decline, leaving behind altered political, economic, and cultural landscapes. The British Empire, at its peak in the 19th and early 20th centuries, governed nearly a quarter of the world's landmass and population through direct colonial rule. By contrast, the United States, emerging as the dominant global power after World War II, presides over a very different kind of system. One based not on colonies but on networks of military, economic, and cultural influence. This comparison between the British Empire and the contemporary US order highlights an important transformation in how power is exercised. While the British model relied on territorial expansion, resource extraction, and naval supremacy, the American model operates through financial systems, military bases, international institutions, and cultural soft power. Together, these two global hegemonies represent successive phases in the evolution of empire: the age of territorial colonialism and the age of networked hegemony. The British Empire was territorial at its core. Its control was exerted through the establishment of colonies, the appointment of governors, and the imposition of British legal and administrative systems. Colonies fell broadly into two categories: settler colonies such as Canada, Australia, and South Africa, where British migrants transplanted their institutions, and exploitation colonies such as India, Nigeria, and much of the Caribbean, where Britain extracted resources and labor without granting political rights. The empire's cohesion depended on visible possession of land and the ability to enforce direct rule. The United States, by contrast, has avoided large-scale colonization, with the exception of territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and a handful of Pacific islands. The US has never sought to govern vast regions of the globe directly. Instead, it projects power indirectly through a system of alliances, military bases, and international institutions. Organizations such as NATO, the United Nations, and financial bodies like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank form part of an American-centered order. Here, sovereignty remains nominally intact, but national policies are shaped by their entanglement with American interests. If the British Empire rested on the possession of land, the American Empire is structured around control of systems. Economic exploitation was the lifeblood of the British Empire. During the mercantilist era, colonies provided raw materials such as cotton, sugar, tea, and rubber, which were shipped to Britain, processed in its factories, and resold to colonial markets. This pattern of extraction fueled Britain's Industrial Revolution and sustained its global dominance. London also became the financial hub of the 19th century, controlling flows of capital and insurance vital to imperial trade. The model was extractive and hierarchical. The colony supplied and the metropole consumed and profited. The American model is both more diffuse and more integrated. Rather than extracting raw materials directly, the US promotes an open, global economy centered on the dollar. Since the Bretton Woods agreements of 1944, the US dollar has functioned as the world's reserve currency, giving Washington unparalleled financial leverage. American multinational corporations, ranging from ExxonMobil and Coca-Cola to Apple, Google, and Amazon, extend U.S. economic reach across every continent. Intellectual property regimes, trade agreements, and global financial institutions reinforce U.S. centrality. If the British economy depended on controlling colonial production, the American economy thrives on embedding itself within global markets and ensuring the indispensability of its currency and corporations. Military supremacy underpinned both empires, though in very different forms. The British Empire relied on its navy, which became the most powerful maritime force in the world by the 18th century. The Royal Navy secured trade routes, protected colonies, and projected force across distant territories. A relatively small professional army was supplemented by colonial troops and local auxiliaries, enabling Britain to maintain control at relatively low cost. Territorial conquest and occupation were often essential to secure resources and suppress rebellions. The US military system is more expansive and technologically sophisticated, with over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. The US maintains a constant global presence. Its military-industrial complex produces cutting-edge weaponry, from aircraft carriers and stealth bombers to drones and cyber warfare systems. Unlike Britain, the US does not typically annex conquered territories. Instead, it intervenes militarily to shape political outcomes, as in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. The strategy is not primarily about controlling colonies, but about preserving an international environment favorable to American interests. While Britain ruled the seas, the US dominates land, sea, air, and increasingly cyberspace. No empire sustains itself on force alone. Legitimacy is essential. The British Empire justified its dominance through the ideology of the civilizing mission. Colonial rule was framed as a paternalistic duty to bring Christianity, modernity, and progress to less developed societies. This rhetoric obscured the material exploitation and systemic racism that underpinned imperial rule, but it provided a moral justification that resonated with many in the metropole. The United States similarly cloaks its global dominance in ideological terms. Since the mid-20th century, American foreign policy has often been justified as the defense of democracy, freedom, and human rights. The Cold War cast the US as the leader of the free world against communism, and after 1991, US interventions were framed as efforts to promote liberal democracy. Beyond official ideology, American soft power through Hollywood, popular music, sports, fashion, and digital culture has embedded US values and lifestyles across the globe. If Britain's empire was legitimized by its claim to civilize, America's empire is legitimized by its claim to liberate. Both, however, use moral missions to mask material interests. All empires confront the problem of decline. The British Empire's unraveling was rapid. 2 world wars exhausted Britain's economy and undermined its capacity to maintain far-flung colonies. Anti-colonial movements across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean seized the moment to demand independence. The rise of the United States and the Soviet Union after 1945 left Britain a secondary power. Decolonization, though uneven, was largely complete by the 1970s, marking the end of Britain's role as a global empire. The US, yes, while still dominant, faces a different trajectory. Its power is being eroded not by colonial revolts but by systemic challenges: the rise of China as an economic and military rival, Russia's efforts to resist American hegemony, and the growing desire of the global south for a multipolar world order. Financial crises, domestic political polarization, and costly military interventions have also weakened US legitimacy. Unlike Britain, the US empire does not rest on colonies that can be lost, but on networks and institutions that may gradually shift away from American leadership. Its decline, if it occurs, will likely be slower, characterized not by collapse, but by the erosion of uncontested primacy. The British and American empires represent two distinct but interconnected forms of global dominance. Britain's power rested on the conquest and administration of territories, the extraction of resources, and the supremacy of its navy. The United States, by contrast, exercises influence through financial systems, military presence, alliances, and cultural soft power. Both empires cloaked material interests in ideological justifications, whether the British civilizing mission or the American promotion of democracy. While the British Empire declined through decolonization after the cataclysm of global wars, the US system may fade more gradually, challenged by rising powers and systemic shifts. Studying the two empires together reveals the adaptability of global power, from direct rule over land to indirect control of networks. In this sense, the story of empire is not one of disappearance but of transformation as the tools of dominance evolve with the times.